Cool polishing. Hi, I'm Yvan Lacroix, and this is the Detailer's Business Academy, where we strive to take you from detailer to entrepreneur. Cool polishing is a slightly different technique when it comes to polishing, and one that will get you faster and better results. How do we go about cool polishing? Well, polishing is a cool thing to do anyways, but polishing cool means keeping the surface as cool as possible. And the reasons for keeping the surface as cool as possible are quite simple. You'll get a better cut, better results, and it's a lot easier on you, the paint, and the machine. First of all, the ergonomics of polishing. When you're having to put pressure on your machine, when you're having to hold it, when you're having to move it around, it's hard on your body. And if you've been doing it as long as I have, you try to find simpler ways for your body. The next thing is putting pressure on the machine creates heat. And heat in modern paints is not a good thing. Now, when I started detailing, we were detailing on lacquer paints. And lacquer, you wanted heat. But today's modern clear coats, you don't want heat. They're plastic. And plastic, when you heat it up, swells, does all sorts of weird things that are not necessary and are counterproductive. Now, if you think of paint as a marshmallow, yes, a marshmallow. We all know what a marshmallow is, tastes good, nice and fluffy. But if you try to take sandpaper to a marshmallow, all it's going to do is move the marshmallow around. If you take sandpaper to an ice cube, it's going to cut that ice cube. And the same thing is happening with your abrasives when you're polishing. If you overheat that plastic or that clear coat, what's happening is your abrasives, instead of cutting it, are just sort of grabbing it and rolling, grabbing and rolling, and not doing what you want them to do. The other thing is, when you're putting pressure on, you're creating heat, and it's bad for your polishing pads. Now, your polishing pads, the cooler they can be, the better they are as well. And everything comes down to reducing temperature. Now, a lot of different strategies for reducing temperature. First, don't put pressure on your machine. You don't need to stand on it. You don't need to put any pressure whatsoever. The weight of the machine is more than enough for polishing, more than enough for compounding. The other thing is, keep your pad as flat as possible. Now, keeping it flat to the surface gives you more contact area. The more contact area you have, the better your polishing will be. The less chance you have of micro-marring, of swirls, depending on what type of machine you're using. And you get done faster. Now, it used to be that we had the, as my friend Faisal would say, the airplane taking off. So you'd hold the machine at about a 30-degree angle to the paint, and that's when, back in the heavy-duty rotary days, you'd hold the machine at about a 30-degree angle to the paint, put some pressure on the edge of it, and go for it. That was great on lacquer paints. But in reality, that's not your most efficient way of cutting. That's far from it. You've only got a small portion of the pad actually touching the paint. Whereas if you put the pad flat, you've got the whole pad touching the paint. And the other thing is, I'm a fan of textured surface pads. Be it waffle pads, my preferred, or something like a CCS pad. The advantage of a textured surface pad is that now that pad has actually better contact with the surface than a flat pad. Cars aren't flat, and a flat pad requires a bit of pressure to get it down on the surface. Whereas a textured pad, textured surface, allows it to conform better to the surface below it. The other advantage of a textured pad is air movement, and air movement brings us back to cool polishing. The cooler the surface, the better it is. Now, the old school wool pads, 7 inches round, an inch thick, people think, oh, you're going to burn paint with those. It's actually the contrary. They stay a lot cooler than a foam pad. So if you like using your rotary, get some wool pads. You'll actually polish cooler and you'll polish faster. The other advantage of polishing cool is you don't have to wait for your results. You're going to get immediate results. What you see is what you get. But if you're overheating the paint, you're swelling it, and you'll get what looks like results today. But once that paint cools down, the solvents evaporate out of the pores, you might see something different, something you don't like. You'll get swirls coming back. You'll get micro-marring coming back. And it doesn't just take an hour. It doesn't take while it cools down. No, it can take up to weeks. If you're using a polish that contains solvents, those solvents now are forced into that surface through the heat. It's going to take them a while to come out. It's sort of the Botox effect. You're injecting solvents into that paint, and until they come out, it has that swollen look. The Botox effect is real. You can test it for yourself, get yourself a scrap panel, and go at it. Create a lot of heat in one section, and then go to another section and polish as cool as possible. Then put it outside, let it sit for a couple weeks, and see the difference in the result. Another way of testing polishing is to get a scrap panel once again and sand it with 2,000 or 3,000 grit paper. Once you have a uniform flat surface, then take your polisher. Now you want to do two things. Do one pass where you're actually forcing yourself to create heat. So that can be done through excessive speed or excessive pressure or both. But only do it for a short amount of time. You don't want to go for full correction. You just want to see how much correction you're doing in X amount of time. And normally 10 to 15 seconds. Then go to another section. Same pad, same machine, but now slow the speed down. And if you're using a DA, you want to use a speed that you still have backing plate rotation, but you don't need to go any faster than that. If you're using a rotary, go as slow as it will go. My preferred speed for the rotary is 400 RPM. Then from there, pad flat to the surface, no pressure, no speed. Turn the machine on and let it polish for the same amount of time that you did on the other section. Then compare your results. And you'll be surprised to find that the section that you didn't do any work, you let the machine actually do the work, probably turned out better. And in the long run, if you let that sit, it'll turn out even better. Now there are different ways of achieving cool polishing. First of all, as I mentioned, no pressure. Reduce the speed and keep your pads clean. A lot of people don't clean their pads regularly. They'll just keep changing pads. Changing pads is a technique. It works. But if you can get a pad washer, even better. Now, I rarely make product recommendations, but this is one I'm going to make. The Lake Country System 4000 pad washer. It's the one you need. It's the one you want. It's the only one that actually works well on the market. There are a lot of different pad washers, but in reality, they're damaging the pads more than they're helping. Whereas the System 4000 from Lake Country actually cleans the pad and makes them last longer. Now, keeping the heat down is going to help your pads. They're going to last a lot longer. And why is the pad washer keeping the heat down? A few things. First of all, you don't have all that paint residue or clear coat residue in your pad. And when we polish single stage paint, we see the pad change colors immediately, and it's drastic. And we want to clean that pad because, whoa, all of a sudden my pad is purple because you're polishing a purple car. That's a rare one. But on the other hand, when you're polishing clear coat, you don't see that residue. You get the same amount of residue in your pad from polishing clear coat as you do from polishing single stage. You just don't see it. Clogging of the pores creates a lot of issues with your pads. First of all, it adds weight. If you're using a DA, changing that pad weight can actually affect the balance of the machine and vibrations. Next, it creates excessive heat. More heat you're creating, more damage you're doing to the paint, more damage you're doing to your pad and to the machine. And finally, it reduces the cutting efficiency of the pad. The pad uses the foam to cut. It uses the abrasives that you're putting on the pad to cut. It doesn't use clear coat residue to cut. And if you have clear coat residue on your pad, you're reducing your amount of cut. So by cleaning the pad regularly, and for myself, I clean it very often. In other words, every time I go to put polish on the pad, I clean it. Never put clean polish on a dirty pad. It's that simple. When I remove the pad from the surface to check it, to wipe it, whatever, and to put more polish on, I wash it first. Now the pad washer will make your pad slightly damp. Not wet, slightly damp. Unless you're using a forced rotation DA. Then the pad washer is not an effective way of cleaning the pad on the go because of the rotation is too slow on a forced rotation machine. But if you're using a DA, if you're using a rotary, cleaning your pad washer, crank the speed up, let it fling all the water out in the pad washer, keep it in there, and then from there, it's just slightly damp. It's not wet. And that slight dampness actually helps again. It keeps the pad cooler. The cooler the pad, the better the cut. The better the cut, the better your results. The other aspect of a slightly damp pad is it actually makes the foam softer. And that foam being more pliable means it's going to conform better to the surface, meaning you're having to apply less pressure. It's a wheel, keeps growing. And as it goes around, it gets better and better and better. So you want to keep your polishing cool. Try it out, practice it. While you're practicing the technique, use an IR thermometer. Check your surface temperature. Paint manufacturers do not recommend exceeding a 30-degree Fahrenheit difference. Now, a 30-degree Fahrenheit difference means if it's 70 degrees in your shop, you don't want that paint getting over 100 degrees. If it's 60 degrees, you don't want to be over 90 degrees. And if it's 100 degrees, take the day off. It's too hot to be working. So those are things that you want to check. And once you learn cool polishing, once you figure it out, once you reteach yourself, because we're used to creating heat. We thought for a long time, and it was true with lacquer paints, that creating heat was a great thing to do. We're not using lacquer paints anymore. You know, our cars are fuel injected, they're not carbureted. All sorts of things have changed. Change your polishing technique, adapt to the newer clear coats. You'll be happier, your customers will be happier, and you're going to save some time. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, or comments, please leave them below. You can always subscribe, hit that notification bell, and even share these videos. Thanks. Have a great day. Thanks for sticking around to the end. I'm going to do a bit of an audio test at the moment, see which one you prefer. Now, this is just using my iPhone. This next test is using my AirPods. How's this? And finally, a lavalier mic. So, which one do you consider the best?